Well, hello there, Facebook. This is Pastor Trina Turner, and we've got a little bit of a different process. Trying to go live this week, and it seems like there's been some upgrades to my Chrome, and it's not allowing me to do it on my computer. So, and now I need to just find the book over here. So bear with me just a little bit. Hi, Betsy. Let's see. Hi, Mama Kathy. We'll come right on in. We're going to be reading in a little bit. I don't know what is going on, or maybe we won't. Kindle. We're supposed to be on our week 7 of our reading This Present Darkness tonight. And there's always something new. Here I am on TM. I know. I can't find anything I'm looking for tonight. That Google switched up some practices for me. And it's not letting me log on the way I typically log on. Good evening. Good evening. It's not going to help right now. So hopefully everyone's having a good day. I'm not in this last moment trying to figure out. Just stop for a minute. Think. The reader don't have a book to read tonight. I can't find my book. Kindle. Hi, Kathy. We miss you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm so sorry this thing is screwing up. Oh my God, Kindle Reader. Well, is it even a Kindle? Kindle Cloud. Hey, Retha. Here's a test. Here's what I need you to do before you bring everybody on camera. I'm going to see if I can't read to you all at the same time if I go over to the book on this same device. So are you there? Let's see. Mama Delois, tell me in just a minute when I switch over. Did the camera stop, Sister Delois, or did it continue? We ready to read? Thank you, Lady VJ Johnson. Waiting on you, Sister Delois, to see if you could still. Oh, good. Okay, M. Wonderful. Then I'm going to. I don't know. Facebook thinks I'm not here. Hi, Pamela. Well, hello, everyone. Yep, she said it stopped. Oh, my Lord. Well, thank you all for joining us. We're going to get started in just a minute with our reading. Come on in and make yourselves comfortable in the meantime. Retha said it came back. I know it came back because I came back over here, but that doesn't let me read. So, poo. Okay, wonderful. You all starting all these watch parties, and I might have to stop it and go over to another feed. Hi. Do 2 Facebook Lives? I wonder. Go live. Well, thank you all for joining me. No, Betsy, I don't still have the book. I have it only on my iPad and my Zoom. Apparently, Google stopped allowing me to Facebook Live or something, and I don't have access to the book. So, not going to be able to read today, but I certainly appreciate you all for joining me. I don't know
to read
what,
today?
huh?
Do you want to read today?
Yes.
I told you you could use mine, but I'd be sitting over here looking at it. You said you don't want to.
Okay, Rufus is going to give me his book. One moment. All right, I think we're going to have a plan. Here we go. Thank you for all the hearts and love. So now, where's your Kindle? Where's your thing?
I'm trying to pull it up.
Oh, on the computer?
Yeah.
You don't have it on your iPad, huh?
I'm gonna check on my iPad. I normally sit
Okay, so you all, we're waiting on, he was telling me he was trying to help me, but he didn't get it ready either. So let's see who we have on here. Wonderful. Cheryl and Kathy and Auntie M, Precious, Sister Dolores, Carla, Aretha, Lady VJ, Pamela, Annette. I hope you all have grace for me today. This is the first week that we've been delayed in trying to pull it up. And so now we will, let me see, figure out. I have the book now. Go down. I think we're on chapter number, figure out how to work Bishop's computer.
what chapter you need.
Okay, we're on chapter 25. How do I change pages in here?
It's
This?
oh
No.
it's going slow. Well, you over in that right in there.
Okay. All right, guys, here we go. We are in week number 7. Here we go. Lucia Hole. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Elder Tammy. You had a hard copy. You should have rushed it right over here to me. Here we go. Week 7, This Present Darkness. Chapter 25. Bernice called Kevin Weed right after she got off the phone with Marshall, but there was no answer. He was probably working with the logging crew today. She dug through her file and found the phone number for Gorst Brother Timber. They told her Kevin had not been in today, and if she saw him, she'd better tell him to show up quick or he'd be out of a job. Thanks, Mr. Gorst. She dialed the Evergreen Tavern in Baker. Dan, the proprietor, answered. Sure, he said. Wheat was here this morning, just like he always is. He was in a gosh awful mood, though. He got in a fight with one of his buddies. And I had, here we go, this is going to be a problem.
What's that?
I don't know how to turn pages.
Go over to the right side of the page and show a little arrow.
But the arrows is taking me to the next page, but there's more reading down here.
Really?
Yeah. Can you just find it on your iPad, please?
Where's my
Okay, they told her Kevin had not been in today, and if she saw him, she'd better tell him to show up quick or he'd be out of a job. She dialed the Evergreen Tavern in Baker. Dan, the proprietor, answered. Sure, he said. Wheat was in here this morning, just like he always is. He was in a gosh awful mood, though. He got in a fight with one of his buddies, and I had to throw them both out. Bernice left Dan the Clarion's number in case. He saw Wheat again, and then she hung up and thought, for a moment, it wasn't out of the question to drive out to Baker, and besides, orders were orders. She went over her schedule for the day and tried to rearrange her jobs to accommodate the trip. Carmen, she said, grabbing her jacket and handbag, I'll be gone for the day, I think. If Marshall calls, tell him I've gone out to check on a source. He'll know what I mean. Righto, said Carmen. Baker was about 17 miles north on Highway 27. The apartments where Weed lived were about 2 miles closer. Bernice found them without too much trouble, a sad complex of dry rotting cubicles honeycombed into a sun-bleached old warehouse. Bernice's nose told her the septic system was failing. She went up the plank of stairs onto the loading dock, which now served as a patio and entranceway. Inside, she was appalled at how dark the building was. She looked down one long corridor and noted many closed-spaced doors. These weren't apartments, they were lockers. She heard some footsteps on the old planks upstairs, and now they came down the stairway just behind her. She turned her head just enough to see an unpleasant-looking character stepping down, a skinny, pimple-faced apparition in black leather. She immediately decided she had a very pressing appointment at the other end of the hall and started in that direction. "Hi there," the man called to her. "Looking for someone?" "Make it quick, Bernice." Just visiting a friend, thank you." "Have a nice visit," he said as he kept looking her over as if she were a steak. She walked quickly down the corridor, hoping it wouldn't be a dead end. And though she didn't look back, she could tell he was still watching her. "Hogan, I'll get you for this." She was glad to find another stairway leading upstairs. Weed's apartment had a 200 number, so she went up the stairs. The stairwell was old, weathered planks, illumined with just one bare light bulb hanging from a very high rafter. Some 30 years ago, someone had tried to paint the walls. She wound her way upward, ignoring the disgusting graffiti everywhere, her shoes making hollow thuds on the worn planks. She reached the upstairs corridor and doubled back, following the descending numbers on the doors. From behind some of the doors came sounds of soap operas, FM rock stations, marital spats. She finally found Weed's door and knocked. There was no answer, but her knocking nudged the door and it drifted slowly open. She helped it quietly on its way. The place was an absolute mess. Bernice had seen the homes of messy people before, but how could Weed possibly live in a disaster area like this? "Kevin," she called. No answer. She stepped inside and closed the door. It had to be vandalism. Weed didn't own that much, but what he did own was thrown about, broken, spilled, and shattered. Papers and bric-a-brac was everywhere. The little cot in the corner was overturned. Weed's guitar was face down on the floor, the back stomped through. The bulbs were broken out of the ceiling fixture. The few secondhand dishes were in shattered pieces all over the floor in the little cubicle. Then she saw words spray painted across one whole wall in an incredibly obscene threat. For the longest time, she didn't move. She was afraid. The implications were clear enough. How long would it be before they struck her or Marshall? She wondered what Marshall would find at Strachan's, and she wondered what her own home looked like. She realized there were no police to call. The police were them. Finally, she slipped quietly out the door, wrote Weed a quick note in case he ever came back, and shoved it in the crack just above the doorknob. She looked this way and that, and then went along the corridor and back down the stairs again. Just one flight below the second floor, a wall formed a blind corner between the two flights at the middle landing. Bernice was just thinking how she didn't like blind corners in a place like this, and how the lighting was so poor. A black figure leaped at her from the flight below. Her body slammed into an old shiplap wall as her teeth clamped together. The man in leather, a rough, dirty hand grabbing a fistful of blouse, a violent sideways jerk, tearing cloth, her body reeling, an impact like an explosion in her left earbud, a blurred, hate-filled face. She was falling. Her arms went out against the rough plank corner. They were limp. They buckled, and she slid down the wall to the floor. A black boot blotted out her vision, and her glasses were driven into her face. Her skull thudded against the wall. She went numb. Her body kept jerking about. He was still hitting her. Step, 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 step. He was gone. She was dreaming. Her head was reeling. There was blood up on the floor and broken glasses and bent pieces. She slumped against the wall, still feeling the fist in her ear and the boot in her face, and hearing the blood drip from her mouth and her nose. The floor drew her down like a magnet until her head finally thumped on the boards. She whimpered a gurgling sound as blood and saliva bubbled over her tongue. She spit it all out, raised her head, and cried out in a sound that was half cry, half moan. From somewhere up above, the boards began to pound and a clatter with a sudden flow of traffic. She heard people shouting, swearing, thundering down the steps. She couldn't move. She kept half dreaming as light and sound faded in and out. Were there, were not there? Hands began to hold her, move her, cradle her. A cloth wiped across her mouth. She felt the new warmth of a blanket. A towel kept dabbing at her face. She gurgled again and spit again. She heard someone swear again. Marshall still wouldn't reply to any questions, although the detectives at Windsor Precinct kept trying. "We're talking about murder here, bub," the detective said. "Now, we have it from a reliable source that you were there at Harmel's place early this morning. And that's right near the time of death. Do you have anything to say about that?" This flunky was born yesterday, Marshall thought. "Sure, punk, I'll tell you all about it, so you can hang me in a pig's eye. It was murder." But really bothered Marshall was just who this reliable source was and how that reliable source knew. Not only had he been at Harmel's, but also knew these cops could find him at Strikens. He was still working on that answer to the riddle. The detective asked, "So you're not going to say anything?" Marshall wouldn't even nod or shake his head. "Well," the detective said with a half shrug, "at least give me the name of your lawyer. You're going to need counsel." Marshall had no name to give him and couldn't even think of one. It became a waiting game. "Spence," said a deputy, "you got a call from Ashton." The detective picked up the phone at his desk. "Nelson here. Oh, hi there. Alf? What's up?" "Alf Brummel?" "Yeah," the detective said. "He's right here. Would you like to talk to him? He sure won't talk to us." He offered Marshall the receiver. "Alf Brummel." Marshall took the receiver. "Yeah, this is Hogan." Alf Brummel was acting shocked and dismayed. "Marshall, what's going on up there?" "I can't say." "They tell me Ted Harmel was murdered and that they have you as a suspect. Is that true?" "I can't say." Alf was beginning to catch on. "Marshall, listen, I'm calling to see if I can help. Now, I'm sure there's been a mistake, and I'm sure we can work something out. What are you doing up at Harmel's place anyway?" "I can't say." That flustered him. "Marshall, for crying out loud, will you just forget that? I'm a cop. I'm also your friend, and I want to help you." "Do it." "I want to. I really want to. Now, listen, let me talk to that Detective Nelson again. Maybe we can work something out." Marshall handed the receiver back to Nelson. Nelson and Brummel talked for a while, and it sounded like they knew each other pretty well. "Well, you might be able to do more with him than I ever will," said Nelson quite pleasantly. "Sure, why not?" "Huh? Yeah, okay." Nelson looked at Marshall. "He's on another line. Guess he'll vouch for you. And I think he can take jurisdiction over your case if there is one." Marshall nodded, all too knowingly. Now Brummel would have Marshall right where he wanted him, if there was a case. If there wasn't one, Brummel would find one. What would it be now? Harmel and Hogan running a child molesting ring with a gangland type murder? Nelson heard Brummel come back on the line. "Yeah? Hello? Yeah, sure." Nelson handed Marshall the receiver again. Brummel was upset, or at least he sounded like it. "Marshall, that was the fire district that just called. They've just sent an aid car out to Baker. It's Bernice. She's been assaulted." Marshall never thought he'd hope Brummel was lying. "Tell me more." "We won't know any more until they get out there. It won't take long. Listen, they're going to release you on personal recognizance under my supervision. You'd better get back to Ashton right away. Can you see me in my office at, say, 3 o'clock? Marshall thought he would have a seizure trying to contain all the cuss words he had for this whole thing. "I'll be there, Alf. Nothing could keep me away." "Good. I'll see you then." Marshall returned the receiver to Nelson. Nelson smiled and said, "We'll take you back to your car." The man in black leather was back in Ashton, running down the streets and then through the alleys like a man possessed, looking behind him, panting, crying, terrified. 5 cruel spirits rode on his back, ducked in and out of his body, clung to him like huge leeches, their talons deeply embedded in his flesh. But they were not in control. They too were terrified. Just above the 5 demons and their running victim, 6 angelic warriors floated along with their swords drawn, moving this way and that, to the right, to the left, whatever it took to keep the demons herded in the right direction. The demons hissed and spit and made shooing motions with their sinewy hands. The young man ran, swatting at invisible bees. The young man and his demons came to a corner. They tried to go left. The angels blocked their way and prodded them with their swords to the right. With a cry and a terrible wailing, the demons fled to the right. The demons began to cry for mercy. "No, let us alone," they pleaded. "You have no right." Just up the street, Hank Bush and Andy Forsythe were walking together, taking some time to share their burdens to pray. Right alongside them walked Triskel and Cryone, Seth and Sion. All 4 of the warriors saw what their comrades were herding their way, and they were more than ready. "Time for an object lesson for the man of God," said Cryone. "Time for an object lesson for the man of God indeed." Triskel only beckoned to the demons with his finger and said, "Come, come." Andy looked down the street and saw the man first. "Well, what?" asked Hank, seeing the dumbfounded look on Andy's face. "Get ready. Here comes Bobby Coursey." Hank looked and cringed at the sight of a wild-looking character running toward them, his eyes filled with terror, his arms beating the air as he battled unseen enemies. Andy cautioned, "Be careful. He could be violent." Oh, terrific. They stood still and waited to see what Bobby would do. Bobby saw them and cried out in even more terror, "No, no, leave us alone." Heaven's warriors were bad enough, but the 5 demons wanted no part of Bush and Forsythe. They twisted Bobby around and tried to run away, but they were instantly hemmed in by the angelic 6. Bobby stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at nothing ahead of him. Then he looked at Hank and Andy. Then he looked again at his unseen enemies. He screamed, standing still where he was, his hands claw-like and trembling, his eyes bulging and glazed. Hank and Andy moved forward very slowly. "Easy, Bobby," Andy said soothingly. "Take it easy now." "No," Bobby screamed. "Leave us alone. We want no business with you." An angel gave one of the demons a prod with the tip of his sword. "Ah!" Bobby cried out in pain, collapsing to his knees. "Leave us alone! Leave us alone!" Hank stepped forward quickly and said firmly, "In Jesus' name, be quiet." Bobby let out one more scream. "Be quiet." Bobby grew still and began to weep, kneeling there on the sidewalk. "Bobby," said Hank, bending down and speaking gently. "Bobby, can you hear me?" A demon clapped his hands over Bobby's ears. Bobby did not hear Hank's question. Hank, hearing from the Spirit of God, knew what the demon was doing. "Demon, in the name of Jesus, let go of his ears." The demon jerked his hands away, a surprised look on his face. Hank asked again, "Bobby?" This time Bobby answered, "Yeah, preacher, I hear you." "Do you want to be free from these spirits?" Immediately one demon answered, "No, you don't. He belongs to us." And Bobby spit the words out in Hank's face. "No, you don't. He belongs to us." "Spirit, be quiet. I'm talking to Bobby." The demon said no more, but backed off sulkingly. Bobby muttered, "I've just done a horrible thing." He began to weep. "You gotta help me. I can't stop from doing this stuff." Hank spoke quietly aside to Andy. "Let's get him somewhere where we can deal with him, where he can make a scene if he has to. The church? Come on, Bobby." They took him by his arms and helped him up, and the 3 and the 5 and the 6 and the 4 headed up the street. Marshall sped through Baker and then made a quick swing by the apartment complex where Reed lived. There seemed to be no activity there, so he drove on to Ashton. When he reached the hospital, the aid car was parked outside. An emergency medical technician who was securing the stretcher back in the vehicle filled Marshall in. "She's in the emergency room, 2 doors down." Marshall burst through the main doors and got to the right room in an instant. He heard a cry of pain from Bernice just as he reached the door. She was lying on a table, attended by a doctor and 2 nurses who were washing her face and dressing her cuts. At the sight of her, Marshall could contain himself no longer. All the anger and the frustration and the terror of this whole day exploded from his lungs in one vehement expletive. Bernice responded through swollen and bleeding lips. "I guess that about covers it." He hurried to the side of the table as the doctors and the 2 nurses gave him room. He took her hand in both of his and couldn't believe what had happened to her. Her attacker had been merciless. "Who did this to you?" he demanded. His blood was boiling. "He went the whole 15 rounds, boss." "Don't clown with me, Bernie. Did you see who did it?" The doctor cautioned him. "Easy now. Let's take care of her first." Bernice whispered something. Marshall couldn't make it out. He leaned closer and she whispered it again, her swollen mouth slurring her words. "He didn't rape me." "Thank God," Marshall said, straightening up. She wasn't satisfied with his response. She motioned to him again to lean forward and listen. "All he did was beat me up. That's all he did." "Aren't you satisfied?" Marshall whispered back rather loudly. She was handed a glass of water to wash her mouth out. She swirled the water around in her mouth and spit into a bowl. "Was Strachan's house nice and neat?" she asked. Marshall held back his answer. He asked the doctor, "When can I talk to her in private?" The doctor thought about it. "Well, she's going in for x-rays in just a few minutes." "Give me 30 seconds, Bernice requested. "Just 30 seconds. "It can't wait?" "No, please." The doctor and the nurses stepped out of the room, and Marshall spoke softly. "Strachan's place was a mess. Somebody really went through it, and he's gone. I've no idea where he is or how he is." Bernice reported. "Weed's place was the same way, and there was a threat spray painted on the wall. He didn't show up for work today, and Dan at the Evergreen Tavern said he was really upset about something. He's gone too. I didn't find him. And now they've got me wrapped up with Ted Harmel's death. They found out I was there this morning, and they think I did it." "Marshall, Susan Jacobson was right. Our phone must be bugged. Remember? You called me at the Clarion and told me you'd been at Ted's and where you were going next." Yeah, I figured that. But that means the Windsor cops would have to be in on it too. They knew right where and when to find me at Strachan's." "Brummel, Detective Nelson are like that, Marshall," Bernice said, holding 2 fingers together. "They must have ears everywhere. They knew I'd be at Wheats alone. And when..." "Thank God," Marshall said, straightening up. She wasn't satisfied with his response. She motioned for him again to lean forward and listen. Oh, I already read that. Oh, this book. Sorry, guys. And when Bernice said, then something else dawned on her. Carmen knew too. That revelation hit Marshall almost like a death sentence. Carmen knows a lot of things. We've been hit, Marshall. I think they're trying to get a message to us. He straightened up. Wait till I find Brummel. She grabbed his hands. Be careful. I mean, really be careful. He kissed her forehead. Happy x-rays. He stormed out of the room like a raging bull, and no one dared to get in his way. Excuse me. Chapter 26. Marshall was seeing red and was so angry that he parked crookedly across 2 parking places in the courthouse square parking lot. He thought that walking fast across the parking lot to see the police department's door might air cool him a bit, but it didn't. He jerked open the door and went into the reception area. Sarah wasn't at her desk. Brummel wasn't in his office. Marshall checked his watch. It was 3 o'clock on the dot. A woman came around the corner. He'd never seen her before. "Hello," he said to her. "Hello." And then he added very abruptly, "Who are you?" She was quite taken aback by the question and timidly answered, "Well, I'm Barbara, the receptionist." "The receptionist? What happened to Sarah?" She was intimidated and a little indignant. I don't know any Sarah, but can I help you? Where's Alf Brummel?" "Are you Mr. Hogan?" "That's right. Chief Brummel is waiting for you in the conference room right down at the end of the hall." She hadn't finished her sentence before Marshall was already on his way. If the door latch would have given the slightest resistance, it wouldn't have survived Marshall's entrance. He burst into the room ready to wring the first neck he could get his hands on. And there were many necks to choose from. The room was full of people Marshall had not been expecting. But as he looked around at all the faces, he had no trouble guessing the meeting's agenda. Brummel had friends with him, big shots, liars, schemers. Alf Brummel sat at the conference table, surrounded by his many comrades, smiling that toothy grin. "Hello, Marshall. Please close the door." Marshall kicked the door shut with his foot, without looking away from all these people now gathered, no doubt, to have it out with him. Oliver Young was there, as was Judge Baker, County Comptroller Irving Pierce, Fire Marshal Frank Brady, Detective Spence Nelson from Windsor, a few other men Marshall didn't recognize, and finally the Mayor of Ashton, David Steen. "Well, hello there, Mayor Steen," Marshall said coldly. "How interesting to find you here." The mayor only smiled cordially and silently, like the dumb puppet Marshall always thought he was. "Have a seat," Brummel said, waving his hand towards an empty chair. Marshall didn't move. "Alf, is this the meeting you and I were going to have?" "This is the meeting," said Brummel. "I don't think you know everyone in the room." With overcooked graciousness, Brummel introduced the new or possibly new faces. "I'd like you to meet Tony Solsky, a local attorney, and I believe you've dealt with Ned Wesley, president of the Independent Bank. We understand you've had a conversation at least with Eugene Baylor, college regent. And of course, you remember Jimmy Claiborne from Commercial Printers." Brummel showed his teeth widely, obnoxiously. "Marshall, please have a seat." Cuss words were going through Marshall's mind as he told Brummel squarely, "Not while I'm outnumbered." Oliver Young piped up in answer to that. "Marshall, I can assure you that this will be a civil and cordial meeting. So which one of you beat the ever-living daylights out of my reporter?" Marshall was hardly feeling civil. Brummel responded, "Marshall, these things happen to people who aren't careful." Marshall smeared some descriptions on Brummel like icing from a sewer trap and then told him seethingly, "Brummel, this didn't just happen. She was set up. She was assaulted and injured, and your cops haven't done a thing, and we all know why." He glared at them. "You're all in on it. All of you." "You're in on this whole thing, and your tricks come real cheap. You vandalize homes, you make threats, you drive people out, you act like some kind of mafia boys club." He aimed an accusing finger at Brummel. "And you, buddy, you are a disgrace to your profession. You've used your entrusted powers to silence and intimidate and to cover up your own dirty work." Young tried to interject. "Marshall, and you called yourself a man of God, a pastor, a pious example of what a good Christian should be. You lied to me all along." Young, hiding behind some excuse you call professional ethics, guzzling down all that mystical bull from that Langstrot witch, and then acting like you knew nothing about it. How many people who trusted you have you sold out to a lie? The men in the room sat silent. Marshall kept unloading. "If you guys are public servants, Hitler was a great humanitarian. You schemed and manipulated and horned your way into this town like mobsters. You silenced anybody who spoke up or got in your way. You will read about it in the paper, gentlemen. If you want to make any comments or denials, I'll be glad to hear them. I'll even print them, but it's press time for all of you, whether you like it or not. Young raised his hands to get just a short moment to speak. Marshall, all I can say is be sure of your facts. Don't worry about that. I have my facts all right. I have innocent people like the Carlucci's, the Wrights, the Andersons, the Dombrowskis, over 100 of them who were driven out of their homes and businesses by intimidation and trumped up tax delinquencies. Young piped in. Intimidation? Marshall, it's hardly within our control to prevent fear. Foolish superstition, family breakups. Just what will you print? That the Carlucci's, for example, were convinced that their store was haunted and that evil spirits of all things broke their small son's hands? Come now, Marshall. Marshall pointed at Young straight from the shoulder. Young, that's your specialty. I'll print that you and your bunch preyed on their fears and orchestrated their superstitions. And I'll tell all about the wild practices and philosophies you used to pull it off. I know all about Langstrot and her mind-tripping hocus pocus, and I know that every one of you is in into it. I'll print that you set people up with phony raps just to get them removed from their jobs and their offices so your own people can move in. You framed Lou Gregory, the former comptroller, with a phony conflict of interest charge. You pushed and pressed for that big turnover on the Whitmore College Board of Regents after Dean Strachan caught Eugene Baylor. Marshall looked right at Baylor as he said it, juggling the books. You put Ted Harmel out of town on his ear with that phony child molesting rap. And I find it interesting that Adam Jarrett's poor little victim daughter now has a special fund set up for her college education. If I look far enough, I'll probably find the money came out of your pockets. I'll print that my reporter was falsely arrested by Brummel's flunkies because she took a picture she wasn't supposed to. A picture of Brummel, Young, and Langstroth with none other than Alexander Cassip himself. Sorry, you all were reading on a new device and it doesn't turn, pages doesn't turn the same way. The big boys behind a conspiracy to take over the town, aided and abetted by all of you, a bunch of power-hungry, pseudo-spiritualized neo-fascists. Young smiled calmly, which means you plan to write about the Omni Corporation? Marshall couldn't believe he was actually hearing it come from Young's mouth. So now it's tell the truth time? Young continued, very relaxed, very confident. Well, you have been tracking down everything that Omni has bought and owns, isn't that right? That's right. Young laughed a little when he asked. And how many houses would you say were turned over to Omni because of tax delinquency? Marshall refused to play games. You tell me. Young simply turned to Irving Pierce, the comptroller. Pierce shuffled through some papers. Mr. Hogan, I believe your records show that 123 homes were auctioned to Omni for failure to pay taxes. He knew. Well, so what? I'll stand by that. You were in error. Let's hear the lie, Pierce. The correct number is 163, all legally, all legitimate over the past 5 years. Marshall hated it, but he couldn't think of a comeback. Young spoke on. You are correct about Omni owning all of these properties, plus many other commercial enterprises as well. But you also should note how these properties have been substantially improved under this new ownership. I would say that Ashton is certainly a better town for it. Marshall could feel the steam rising in his pipes. Those people paid their taxes. I've talked to over 100 of them. Pierce was unmoved. We have substantial evidence to show that they did not. In a pig's eye. And in regard to the college, Young looked at Eugene Baylor, giving him his clue. Baylor stood to speak. I've really had quite enough of this slander and gossip about the college being in financial arrears. The college is doing just fine, thank you. And this smear campaign that Eldon Strachan began must stop or we will sue. Mr. Solsky has been retained for just that eventuality. I have records, I have proof, Baylor, that you've embezzled Whitmore College out of millions. Brummel piped in. You have no proof, Marshall. You have no records. Marshall had to smile. Oh, you ought to just see what I have. Young said simply, we have seen it, all of it. Marshall had the feeling deep inside that he had just stepped off of a cliff. Young continued with a progressively cooling tone. We've been following your futile attempts from the very beginning. We know you talked to Ted Harmel. We know you've been interviewing Eldon Strachan, Joe Carlucci, Lou Gregory, and hundreds of other quacks, malcontents, and doomsayers. We know you've been harassing our people and our businesses. We know that you've been snooping in all of our personal records. Young paused for effect and then said, that's all going to stop now, Hogan. Hence this meeting, Marshall said with sarcastic flair. What's in store for me, Young? How about it, Brummel? Got a nice morals rap to pin on me? You're going to send someone to tear up my house too? Young stood up, motioning for a chance to speak. Marshall, you may never understand our true motivations, but at least give me one opportunity to try to clear the matter up for you. There is no predatory thirst for power here among us. As you probably think, we do not seek power as an end. No, you just came upon it purely by accident, Marshall said cuttingly. Power for us, Marshall, is only necessary as one means toward our real goal for mankind, and that is nothing other than universal peace and prosperity. Who's we and us? Oh, you already know that too, all too well. The society, Marshall. The society you've been hounding after all of this time as if chasing after some mysterious burglar. The Universal Consciousness Society. And we have our own little chapter here in Ashton, our own little piece of the Conquer the World Club. Young smiled ever so tolerantly. More than a club, Marshall. Actually, a long-awaited, newly rising force for global change. A worldwide voice that will finally unite mankind. Yeah, and such a wonderful humanitarian movement that you have to sneak in with it. You have to hide it only from old ideals, Marshall. From the old obstacles of religious bigotry and intolerance. We live in a changing and growing world, and mankind is still evolving, still maturing. Many still lag behind in the maturing process and cannot tolerate the very thing that will be best for them. Marshall, too many of us just don't know what's best. Someday, and we hope it will be soon, everyone will understand there will be no more religion, and then there will be no more secrets. In the meantime, you do what you can to scare people and chase them from their homes and businesses, only if they are limited in their perspective and resist the truth, only if they stand in the way of what is truly right and good. Marshall was getting as sick as he was angry. Truly right and good. What? All of a sudden, you guys are the new authority on what's right and good? Come on, Young. Where's your theology? Where does God fit into all of this? Young gave a resigned shrug and said, we are God. Marshall finally did sink into a chair. Either you people are crazy or I am. I know it's quite beyond anything you've ever considered before. Admittedly, ours are very high and lofty ideals. But what we've come to achieve is inevitable for all men. It is nothing more than the final destination of man's evolution. Enlightenment, Self-realization. Someday all men, even yourself, must realize their own infinite potential, their own divinity, and become united in one universal mind, one universal consciousness. The alternative is to perish. Marshall had heard enough. Young, that is pure, unadulterated horse hockey, and you are out of your ever-loving mind. Young looked at the others and almost looked sad. We all hoped you would understand, but in truth, we did expect you to feel this way. You have so far to go, Marshall, so very far to go. Marshall took a good look at all of them. You plan to take over the town, don't you? Buy out the college, make it some kind of hive for your cosmic, mind-blown society? Young looked at him with a very sober face and said, it's for the very best, Marshall. It has to be this way. Marshall got up and headed for the door. I'll see you in the paper. You have no paper, Marshall, Young said abruptly. Marshall only turned and shook his head at Young. Drop dead. Ned Wesley, the president of the Independent Bank, spoke on cue from Young. Marshall, we have to foreclose on you. Marshall did not believe what he heard. Wesley opened the file of the records to Marshall's business loan and of the Clarion. You've been delinquent in your payments for 8 months now, and we've received no response whatsoever from our many inquiries. We really have no choice but to foreclose. Marshall was totally prepared to make Wesley eat his phony records, but didn't have time before Irving Pierce, the county comptroller, spoke up. As for your taxes, Marshall, I'm afraid those have become quite delinquent as well. I just don't know how you thought you could go on living in that house without meeting your obligations. Marshall knew he could be a murderer right about now. It would be the easiest thing in the world, except that there were 2 cops in the room who would love to pin such a rap on him, and a judge that would love to lock him away for good. You are all crazy, he said slowly. You'll never get away with it. Just then, Jimmy Claiborne from Commercial Printers put in his 2 cents. Marshall, I'm afraid we've been having some trouble with you as well. My records here show that we haven't been paid for the last 6 runs of the Clarion. There's no way we can continue to print the paper for you until these accounts are cleared up. The detective Nelson added, these are very serious matters, Marshall. And as far as our investigation of Ted Harmel's murder, these things do not put you in a very good light. As for the courts, Judge Baker said, whatever decisions we ultimately render will depend, I suppose, on your behavior from now on, especially in the light of the complaints of sexual misconducts we've just received, added Brummel. Your daughter must be a very frightened girl to have remained silent for so long. He felt like bullets were ripping into him. He could feel himself dying. He was sure of it. The 5 demons clung tenaciously. Clung tenaciously to Bobby Corsi, hissing, what in the world? As far as the chords, okay. Okay, guys, still having trouble turning pages. Give me a minute. Door, you have no paper. He could be a murderer. Felt like bullets ripping into him. He can feel himself dying. Very interesting. Okay, got to go with it. The 5 demons clung tenaciously to Bobby Corsi, hissing their sulfurous oaths and cursings as they cowered in the front of the little sanctuary of the Ashton Community Church. Triskel, Cryone, Seth, and Sion were there, along with 6 other warriors, their swords drawn, surrounding the little prayer group. Hank had his Bible handy and had already gone through a few references in the Gospels to get some idea of how to proceed. He and Andy held Bobby firmly but gently as Bobby sat on the floor in the front of the pulpit. John Coleman had come right over to help, and Ron Forsythe wouldn't have missed it. Yeah, Ron observed, he's got it bad. Hey, Bobby, remember me? I'm Ron Forsythe. Bobby looked at Ron with glassy, staring eyes. Yeah, I remember you. But the demons also remembered Ron Forsythe and the hold their comrades once had on his life. Traitor! Traitor! Bobby began to scream at Ron. Traitor! Traitor! As he struggled to free himself. Hank and Andy, John, they stepped to hold Bobby down. Hank commanded the demon, stop it! Stop it right now! The demon spoke through Bobby as Bobby turned and cursed at Hank. We don't need to listen to you, praying man. You will never defeat us. You will die before you defeat us. Bobby glared at the four men and screamed, you will all die. Hank prayed aloud so everyone, including Bobby, could hear. Lord God, we come against these spirits now in Jesus' name. We bind them. The five spirits ducked their heads under their wings as if being pelted by stones, crying and whimpering. No, no, said Bobby. Hank continued, and I pray right now that you will send your angels to help us. The 10 warriors were ready and waiting. Hank addressed the spirits. I want to know how many are in there. Speak up. One demon, a smaller one, ducked inside Bobby's back and shrieked, no! The scream came out, belching out of Bobby's throat. Which one are you? Hank asked. I won't tell you. You can't make me. By the name of Jesus, the demon responded immediately. Fortune telling. Hank asked, fortune telling. How many of you are in there? Millions. Tresco jabbed fortune telling lightly in the flank. 10. Another jab. No, we are only 5. Only 5. Bobby began to twitch and shake as the demons got into a scuffle. Fortune-telling found himself the brunt of some very harsh blows. No, no, Bobby screamed for the demon. Now see what you made me do. The others are hitting me. In Jesus' name, leave, said Hank. Fortune-telling let go of Bobby and floated up over the group. Creani grabbed him. Depart from the region, he ordered. Fortune-telling immediately obeyed and soared out of the church, not looking back. A large, hairy demon shouted after the departed spirit, and Bobby stared at the ceiling, shouting, Traitor! Traitor! We'll get you for that! And who are you? Hank asked. The demon shut its mouth, as did Bobby, and glared at the men with eyes full of fire and hatred. Spirit, who are you? Andy demanded. Bobby remained silent, his entire body strained, his lips tightly sealed together, his eyes bulging out. He was taking frantic, short breaths through his nose. His face was crimson. Spirit, said Andy, I command you to tell us who you are in Jesus' name. Don't you mention that name, the spirit hissed and then cursed. I will mention that name again and again, said Hank. You know that name has defeated you. No, no. Who are you? Confusion, madness, hatred. I do them. Bobby's back shrieked. No, no. I do them all. In the name of Jesus, I bind you and command you to come out. The demons all made a sudden rushing of their wings together, pulling, tearing at Bobby, trying to get away. Bobby struggled to get free from the men who held him, and it was all they could do to hold him down. They outweighed him at least 4-1, and yet he almost threw them off. Come out, all 4, commanded. The second spirit lost his grip on Bobby and jolted upward as Bobby suddenly relaxed. The spirit immediately found himself in the waiting hands of 2 warriors. Depart from this region, they ordered him. He looked down at Bobby glaringly at his 3 remaining cohorts and then shot out of the church and streaked away. The third demon spoke right up, speaking through Bobby's voice. You'll never get me out. I've been here most of his life. Who are you? Witchcraft, lots of witchcraft. It's time for you to leave, said Hank. Never, we're not alone, you know. There are many of us, only 3 by my count. Yes, in him, yes, but you'll never get to all of us. Go ahead and cast us out of this one. There are still millions in town, millions. The demon laughed uproariously. Andy ventured a question, and what are you all doing here? This is our town. We own it. We're going to stay forever. We're going to cast you out, said Hank. Witchcraft only laughed and said, go ahead and try it. Come out in Jesus' name. The demon held tightly, desperately to Bobby. Bobby's whole body strained again. Hank commanded again, witchcraft, in Jesus' name, come out. The demon spoke through Bobby as Bobby's eyes, wild and bulging, glared at Hank and Andy, and every sinew in his neck strained like a piano wire. I won't, he's mine. Hank, Andy, John, and Ron all beginning to pray together, pounding at witchcraft with their prayers. The demon ducked inside Bobby and tried to hide his head under his wings. He drooled from pain and agony. He winced at every mention of Jesus. The praying continued. Witchcraft began to gasp for breath. He cried out, Rafar! Bobby cried, Bill, Rafar! Say that again. The demon continued to cry out through Bobby, Rafar, Rafar. Who is Rafar? Hank asked. Rafar is Rafar. Rafar is Rafar is Rafar. Bobby's body twitched and he spoke like a sickening broke record. And who is Rafar? Andy asked. Rafar rules. He rules. Rafar is Rafar. Rafar is Lord. Jesus is Lord, John reminded the demon. Satan is Lord, the demon argued. You said Rafar was Lord, Hank said. Satan is Lord of Rafar. What is Rafar Lord of? Rafar is Lord of Ashton. Rafar rules Ashton. Andy tried a hunch. Is he the prince over Ashton? Rafar is prince of Ashton. Well, we rebuke him too, said Ron. Near the big dead tree, Rafar spun quickly around as if someone had just pricked him, and he eyed several of his demons suspiciously. The demon continued to spout his boast, speaking through Bobby, whose face contorted in almost a perfect representation of the demon's expressions. We are many, the demon boasted. And Ashton is your town? Asked Hank. Except for you, praying man. Then it's time to start praying, said Andy, and they all did. The demon grimaced in terrible pain, desperately hiding its head under its wings and hanging on to Bobby with all its rapidly ebbing strength. No, it whimpered. Let go, witchcraft, said Hank, and come out of him. Please let me stay. I won't hurt him, I promise. A sure sign. Hank and Andy glanced at each other. The thing was about to go. Hank looked directly into Bobby's eye and commanded, Spirit, in the name of Jesus, come out now. The demon shrieked as his talons began to slip loose from Bobby. Slowly, inch by inch, they began to withdraw despite the demon's most frantic efforts to keep them driven in. He screamed and he cursed, and the sounds came out through Bobby's throat as the very last talon broke loose and the demon fluttered upward. The angels were about to command him to leave the region, but he was already on his way. I'm going, he hissed, streaking away. Bobby relaxed, as did the four men who were ministering to him. Okay, Bobby? Andy asked. Bobby, the real Bobby, answered. Yeah, there's still some in there. I can feel them. We'll rest a minute, and then we'll get them all out, said Hank. Yeah, said Bobby. Let's do that. Ron patted Bobby's knee. You're doing all right, man. Just then, Mary walked into the sanctuary to see if she could help in any way. She had heard they were ministering to someone in here, and she didn't feel right staying at home. But then she saw Bobby, the man in leather. She froze in her place. Bobby looked up and saw her. So did one of the demons inside him. Suddenly, Bobby's face changed from that of an exhausted and frightened young man to that of a leering, lustful, raping spirit. Hey there, he said. That spirit spoke through Bobby, and then the spirit referred to Mary in lascivious, obscene terms. Hank and the others were shocked, but they knew who was doing the speaking. Hank looked toward Mary, and she was backing away, terrified. He's the one who threatened me in the parking lot, she cried. The demon spouted more obscenities. Hank intervened immediately. Spirit, Be quiet. The spirit cursed at him. That's your wife, eh? I bind you in the name of Jesus. Bobby curled and writhed as if in terrible pain. The demon was feeling the sting of their prayers. Leave me alone, it screamed. I want to. It went on to describe rape in hideous detail. Mary recoiled, but then regathered herself and spoke back. How dare you? I'm a child of God, and I don't have to put up with that kind of talk. You be silent and come out of him. Bobby curled like a stuck worm and retched. Let him go, Rape, commanded Andy. Let go of him, said Hank. Mary stepped closer and said firmly, I rebuke you, demon. In Jesus' name, I rebuke you. The demon fell from Bobby as if struck by a wrecking ball and fluttered about on the floor. Cryone scooped him up and flung him out of the church. The one remaining spirit was quite intimidated, but very obnoxious anyway. I beat up a woman today. We don't want to hear about it, said John. Just get out of there. I hit her and I kicked her and I beat her up. Be quiet and come out, Hank ordered. The demon cursed loudly and left, helped on his way by Cryone. Bobby slumped to the floor, exhausted, but a gentle smile crossed his face and he started to laugh happily. They're gone. Thank God they're gone. Hank, Andy, John, and Ron moved in to comfort him. Mary stayed back, still unsure of this seedy-looking character. Andy was clear and direct. Bobby, you need to have the Holy Spirit in your life. You need Jesus if you want to stay free of those things. I'm ready, man. I'm ready, Bobby said. Right then and there, Bobby Corsi became a new creation, and his first words as a Christian were, guys, this town is in trouble. Wait till you hear what I've been up to and who I've been working for. Ooh, y'all hanging in there? All right, here we go. We're going on to chapter 27. We're reading This Present Darkness by Frank E. Peretti. It always took place in Professor Julian Langstrot's apartment in the darkened living room, sitting on the warm, comfortable sofa, illumined by one candle on the coffee table. Langstrot was always the teacher and guide, giving instructions in her calm, clear voice. Sean was always there as a moral supporter and fellow participant. Sandy was never alone. They had been meeting like this regularly now, and each time was a whole new adventure. The quiet, restful excursions into the other levels of consciousness were like opening a whole new door to a higher reality, the world of psychic powers and experiences. Sandy was totally enthralled. The metronome on the coffee table ticked, a slow, restful, steady rhythm. Breathing in, breathing out. Relax, relax, relax. Sandy was getting quite skilled at dropping below the upper levels of consciousness, those levels in which all humans normally operate, but which are the most distracted and cluttered by outside stimuli. Somewhere below that were the deeper levels, where true psychic ability and experience could be found. To reach these levels took careful, methodical relaxation, meditation, concentration. Langstrot had taught her all the steps. As Sandy sat very still on the couch, and Sean watched intently, Langstrot counted down slowly, steadily in a cadence with the metronome. 25, 24, 23. In Sandy's mind, she was riding an elevator, descending into the lower levels of her being, relaxing, putting her upper levels of brain activity on hold while she moved through the lower realms. 3, 2, 1. Alpha level, said Langstrot. Now open the door. Sandy visualized herself opening the elevator door and stepping into a beautiful green meadow, bordered by trees covered with pink and white blossoms. The air was warm, and a playful breeze wafted across the meadow like a gentle caress. Sandy looked here, and she looked there. Do you see her? Langstroth asked gently. I'm still looking, Sandy answered. Then her face brightened. Oh, here she comes. She's beautiful. Sandy could see the girl coming toward her, a beautiful young lady with cascading blonde hair, all dressed in a shimmering white linen. Her face glowed with happiness. She was extending her hands in greeting. Hello, Sandy called happily. Hello, said the girl in the most beautiful and melodic voice Sandy had ever heard. Have you come to guide me? The blonde girl took Sandy's hand in her own and looked into her eyes with tremendous kindness and compassion. Yes, my name is Madeline. I will teach you. Sandy looked at Madeline with amazement. You look so young. Have you lived before? Yes, hundreds of times. But each life was simply a step upward. I'll show you the way. Sandy was ecstatic. Oh, I want to learn. I want to go with you. Madeline took Sandy by the hand and began to lead her across the green meadow toward the immaculate golden walkway. As Sandy sat on the sofa in Langstroth's apartment, her face full of joy and rapture, gleaming talons penetrated her skull as the black and gnarled hands of a hideous demon held her head in a vice-like grip. The spirit leaned over her and whispered the words to her mind. Then come with me, and I will introduce you to others who have ascended even before me. Love to, Sandy responded. Langstroth and Sean smiled at each other. Tom McBride, the paste-up man, heard the little bell over the front door ring and could only moan. This day had been the most traumatic he'd ever been through. He scurried to the front just in time to see Marshall come in and make a beeline for his office. Tom was distraught and full of questions. Marshall, where have you been? And where's Bernice? The papers haven't come from the printer. I've had nothing but calls all day. I finally had to put the phone on the answering machine, and people have been coming by wondering where today's paper is. Where's Carmen? Marshall asked, and Tom noticed Marshall looked very, very sick. Marshall? Tom asked, very worried. What happened? What's wrong? What's going on around here? Marshall just about bit Tom's head off when he growled, Where's Carmen? She's not here. She was here, but then Bernice took off, and then she took off, and I've been here all alone all day. Marshall flung the door to his office open and got inside. He went straight for a file drawer and yanked it out. It was empty. Tom stood at a safe distance and watched Marshall reach under his desk and pulled out a cardboard box. The box slid out easily and lightly. He saw that it was empty too and dashed it to the floor with a loud oath. Is there anything I can do? Tom asked. Marshall flopped into his chair, his face like chalk, his hair disheveled. For a moment, he just sat there, leaning his head on his hand, breathing deeply, trying to think, trying to calm down. Call the hospital, he finally said in a very weak voice that didn't sound much like Marshall Hogan at all. The hospital? Tom didn't like the sound of that at all. Asked him, how's Bernice doing? Tom's mouth dropped open. Bernice? Is she in the hospital? What happened? Marshall exploded. Just do it, Tom. Tom scurried to a phone. Marshall got up and went to his door. Tom! Tom looked up but kept trying to dial the phone. Marshall leaned in on the doorpost. He felt so weak, so helpless. Tom, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. Thanks for making that call. Let me know what they say. And with that, Marshall turned and went back into his office, flopping into his chair, sitting there motionless. Tom came back with his report. Bernice had a cracked rib, and they wrapped it, but no other serious injuries. Somebody brought her car back from Baker, so they released her and she drove home. That's where she is now. Yeah, I gotta get home. What happened to her? She was beat up. Somebody jumped her, clobbered her. Marshall, Tom was almost too horrified for words. That's terrible. Marshall worked himself out of the chair and leaned against his desk. Tom was still concerned. Marshall, is there going to be a Friday edition? We sent pay stubs to the printer. I don't understand. They didn't print it, Marshall answered blandly. What? Why not? Marshall let his head fall forward and he shook his head. He shook just a little bit. He blew out a sigh and then he looked at Tom again. Tom, just go ahead. Take the day off. What's left of it. Let me get squared away here and then I'll call you, okay? Well, okay. Tom went into the back room for his lunchbox and his coat. The phone rang, a different line, a number Marshall reserved for special calls. Marshall picked it up. Clarion, he said. Marshall? Yeah. Marshall, this is Eldon Strachan. Oh, thank God he's alive. Marshall felt his throat tighten. He thought he would cry. Eldon, are you all right? Well, no. We just got back from a trip, Marshall. Someone just tore up my house. The place is a mess. Is Doris all right? Well, she's upset. I'm upset. We've all been hit, Eldon. They're on to us. What's happened? Marshall recounted it all to him. The hardest part of all was telling Eldon Strachan that his friend and fellow outcast Ted Harmon was dead. Strachan had trouble speaking for quite some time. Several minutes were spent in an awkward, painful silence, interrupted only a few times by either man asking if the other was still on the line. Marshall, Strachan finally said, we'd better run. We'd just better get the heck out of here and not come back. Run where? Marshall asked. You already ran once, remember? As long as you're alive, Eldon, you're going to be living with this, and they're going to know it. But what can any of us do? You have friends, for crying out loud. What about the state attorney general? I told you I can't go to Norm Mattingly with nothing but my word. I need more than just our friendship. I need proof, some kind of documentation. Marshall looked down at the empty cardboard box. I'll get you something, Eldon. One way or another, I'll get you something to show to anybody who'll listen. Eldon sighed. I just don't know how much longer this is going to have to go on. As long as we let it, Eldon. He thought for a moment and then he said, Yeah, you're right. Just get me something solid and I'll see what I can do. We have no choice. Our necks are on the block right now. We've got to save ourselves. Well, I certainly intend to do that. Doris and I are going to disappear and fast, and I'd advise you to do the same. We sure can't stay around here. So where do I reach you? I won't tell you over the phone. Just wait to hear from Norm Mattingly's office. It'll mean I got through to him, and that's the only way I'll be any good to you anyway. If I'm not here, if I skipped town or ended up dead, have him contact Al Limley at the New York Times. I'll try to leave word with him. I'll see you again sometime. Let's pray that you do. Oh, I'm starting to pray a lot these days. Marshall hung up, locked all the doors, and headed for home. Bernice lay on her couch with an ice bag over her face and an uncomfortable bandage around her rib cage, and she really did want a phone call. She had already thrown up once. Her head was throbbing, and she felt miserable. But she wanted a phone call. What was happening out there? She tried calling the Clarion, but no one answered. She called Marshall's home, but no one answered there. Well, what do you know? The phone rang. She snatched it up like an owl grabbing a mouse. Hello? Bernice Kruger? Kevin? Yeah, man. He sounded very nervous and high-strung. Hey, I'm dying, man. I'm really scared. Where are you, Kevin? I'm at home. Hey, somebody came in here and tore the place apart. Is your door locked? Yeah. Then why don't you lock it? Is your door closed? Yeah. Then why don't you lock it? Yeah, I got it locked. I'm scared, man. They must have a contract out on me. Be very careful what you say, Kevin. What we heard about our phones being bugged is probably true, and they may have bugged your phone. We didn't say anything for a moment. Then he cursed out of sheer fright. Oh, man, I just got a call from you-know-who. You think they heard us talking? I don't know. We just have to be very careful. What am I going to do, man? It's all going down. It's all going down, man. Susan says she got the goods and it's all going down. She's going to split that place. Bernice cut him short. Kevin, don't say another word. You'd better tell me in person. Let's meet somewhere. But won't they know we're meeting? Hey, if they know, they know. But at least we'll have some control over what they hear. Well, let's do it quick. Quick. How about that bridge a few miles north of Baker? The one over the Judd River? The big green one? Yeah, that one. There's a turnoff right at the north end of it. I can be there by, Bernice looked at the clock on the wall. Let's say 7. I'll be there. Okay, goodbye. Bernice immediately dialed the clarion. No answer. She dialed Marshall's phone. The telephone in the Hogan kitchen rang and rang, but Marshall and Kate remained silent at the kitchen table, letting it ring until finally it stopped. Kate, her hands shaking just a little, her breath consciously controlled, looked at her husband with tear-filled eyes. The telephone has a way of bringing constantly bad news, she quipped, her eyes dropping for a moment. Right now, Marshall had as much intestinal fortitude as an empty garbage bag, and for one rare occasion in his life, he was at a loss for words. When did you get that call? He finally asked. This morning. But you don't know who it was? Kate took a deep breath, trying to stay on top of her emotions. Whoever it was, he knew just about everything about you, about me, and even Sandy. So he wasn't just a crank in that respect. His credentials were very impressive. But he was lying, Marshall said angrily. I know, Kate answered assertively. It's just another smear tactic, Kate. They're trying to take away my newspaper. They're trying to take away my home. And now they're trying to destroy my marriage. There isn't now, nor has there ever been, any kinds of goings on between Bernice and me. For crying out loud, I'm old enough to be her father. I know, Kate answered. She took a moment to build up strength to continue. Marshall, you are my man. And if I were to ever lose you, I know I'd never find a better one. I also know you're not a man given to just tossing around his passions. I have a prize in you, and I've never forgotten that. He took her hand, and you're all the woman I could ever handle. She squeezed his hand, and she said, I do have confidence that these things will never change. I suppose it's that kind of confidence that kept me hanging on, waiting. Her voice trailed off. And there was a moment of silence. Kate had to choke down her emotions, and Marshall couldn't think of anything to say. Marshall, she finally said, there are some other things that haven't changed either. But those things were supposed to change. You and I agreed together that they would. We agreed that things would be different after we moved from New York, and that you would take it easy, and that you'd have more time for your family, and that maybe we could all get to know one another again and patch things up. The tears began to flow, and it was difficult for her to speak, but she was committed now, so she kept going. I don't know. I don't know what it is, whether the ultimate scoop simply tags. I'm all choked up too, I guess. Whether the ultimate scoop simply tags after you no matter where you go, or if you concoct it on your own time after time. But if I were to ever be jealous or suspicious of another lover, that's what the lover would be. You do have another love, Marshall, and I just don't know if I can compete with it. Marshall knew he'd never be able to fully explain everything. Kate, you've no idea how big this whole thing is. She shook her head. She didn't want to hear it. That's not at issue here. As a matter of fact, I'm sure it's big. I'm sure it's extremely important. It probably does warrant the amount of time and energy you've put into it. But what I am coping with now is the detriment that this whole thing has been to myself, to Sandy, and to this family. Marshall, I don't care about comparisons. No matter where Sandy and I have been placed on your list of priorities, we are still suffering. And that is the direct problem that I'm dealing with. I can't care about anything else. Kate, that's what they want. They're getting it, she countered abruptly. But don't you dare blame anyone else for your failure to live up to your promises. No one else is responsible for your promises, Marshall. And I am holding you responsible for the promises you made to your family. Kate, I didn't ask for this to come up. I didn't ask for this to happen. When it's all over, it's over now. That stopped him cold. And it's not really a matter of choice for me. I have my limitations, Marshall. I know there's only so much I can take. I have to get away. Marshall was too weak to say a word. He couldn't even think of any words. All he could do was look her in the eye and let her speak, let her do whatever she had to do. Kate kept going. She had to get it all out before she would be unable to. I talked to my mom this morning. She was very supportive of both of us, and she's not taking sides at all. As a matter of fact, you might find this interesting. She's been praying for us, for you in particular. She says she even dreamt about you the other night. She dreamt that you were in trouble and that God would send his angels to help you if she prayed. She took the whole thing pretty seriously, and she's been praying ever since. Marshall smiled weakly. He appreciated that, but what good was it doing? Kate came to the bottom line. I'm going to stay with her for a while. I need time to think, and you need time to think. We both need to know for sure just which of your promises you are willing to live up to. We need to get it settled once and for all, Marshall, before we go one step further. As for Sandy, right now, I don't even know where she is. If I can find her, I might ask her to come with me, although I doubt she'll want to leave Sean and everything they're involved in. She drew a deep breath as this new pain took hold of her. All I can say is, you don't know her anymore, Marshall. I don't know her. She's been slipping away. And you were never here. She couldn't go on. She buried her face in her hands and she wept. Marshall found himself wondering if he should even go to her, if he should even comfort her, put his arms around her. Would she accept it? Would she even believe that he cared? He did care. His own heart was breaking. He went to her and gently put his hand on her shoulder. I won't give you any pat answers, he said quietly. You're right. Everything you've said is right. And I don't dare make any more promises now that I may not be able to keep. The words hurt even as he forced himself to say them. I do need to think about it. I need to do some real house cleaning. Why don't you go ahead? Get away from all of this. Stay with your mom. Get away from this mess. I'll let you know when it's all over, when I'm settled on what's important. I won't even ask you to come back until then. I love you, Marshall, she said as she wept. I love you too, Kate. She rose suddenly and embraced him, giving him a kiss he would remember for a long time. A kiss when she held him desperately tight, when her face was wet with tears, when her body trembled with her weeping. He held her with his strong arms as if he were hanging on to his very life, a priceless treasure he might never have again. Then she said, I'd better just go, and gave him one final hug. He held her for one last moment and then said as comfortingly as he could, it'll be okay. Goodbye. Her bags were already packed. She didn't take much. After the front door quietly closed behind her and the little pickup truck eased out of the driveway, Marshall sat alone at the kitchen table for a very long time. He numbly stared at the wood grain patterns in the tabletop, 1,000 memories flooding through his mind. Minutes upon minutes passed without his heed. The world went on without him. At last his stupor crumbled as all his thoughts and feelings came to rest on her name, Kate. And he cried and he cried. All right, last chapter, chapter 28. Giglio bit his lower lip and surveyed the valley below along with his 24 warriors. From their vantage point, halfway down the mountain slopes and in among the rocks, the strong man's lair was a boiling, humming cauldron of black spirits, their myriads forming a swarming, living haze over the cluster of buildings below. The sound of their wings was a constant, low-pitched drone that echoed back upon itself from the rocky crags all around. The demons were disturbed right now like an angry hive of bees. They're building up for something, a warrior observed. Even so, said Giglio, something doesn't feel right, and I would venture to say it has to do with her. All around the complex, vans and trailers, packed with everything from office supplies right down to Alexander Cassov's stuffed trophies. The personnel were now going through their dormitories, packing up their personal belongings and sweeping out the rooms. Everywhere there was a pervading excitement and anticipation, and people clustered here and there, chattering in their native languages. In the big stone house, secluded from all the activities, Susan Jacobson worked hurriedly in her private room, consolidating a huge box of records, ledgers, documents, printed matter. She was trying to eliminate anything she didn't absolutely need. Almost every item seemed indispensable. Even so, only one suitcase now sitting on her dresser would have to contain it all. So far, the load was too bulky to fit in the suitcases and too heavy for Susan to carry, even if it did. With some hastily muttered prayers and some more quick perusals, she eliminated half of the items. She then took what was left and began to carefully arrange it all in the suitcase. A ledger here, some affidavits there, more documents, some photographs, another ledger, a computer printout, a thick ream of photocopies, and some undeveloped film. Footsteps in the hall. She hurriedly closed the suitcase, pressing the lid shut so she could fasten the latches, and then lugged the heavy thing toward the big bed where she quickly slid it underneath. She then threw all the other unpacked items back into the box and concealed the box on a shelf behind some linens in a small closet. Without knocking, Cassip came into the room. He wore casual clothes because he too had been packing and taking part in all of the activity. She went to him and threw her arms around him. "Well, hi, how are things on your end?" He returned her embrace briefly, and then dropped his arms and began to look around the room. "We were wondering whatever became of you," he said. "We are meeting in the dining hall, and we were hoping you would attend." There was something strange and ominous in his tone. "Well," she said, a little abashed at his demeanor, "of course I'm gonna attend. I wouldn't miss it for anything." Good, he said, still looking all around the room. "Susan, may I look through your suitcase?" She looked at him curiously. "What?" He would not change or qualify his question. "I want to look in your suitcase." "Whatever for?" "Bring it here," he said in a tone not to be argued with. She went to her closet and brought out a large blue suitcase full of clothes and laid it on the bed. He opened the latches and threw back the lid, then proceeded to very quickly and very rudely unpack it, throwing its contents here and there. "Hey," she protested, "what are you doing? It took me hours to get all that in there." He thoroughly emptied it, opening every side pocket, unloading and shaking out every garment, and when he finished, she was quite angry. "Alex, what is the meaning of this?" He turned to her with a very grim expression, and then his face suddenly broke into a smile. "I'm sure you can pack your suitcase even more efficiently the second time." She knew she didn't dare give him any comeback for that, but it was necessary for me to check on something. "You see, dear Susan, you've been absent from the normal flow of the population and absent from my presence for a considerable time." He began to walk slowly around the room, his eyes darting over every nook and corner of it. "And it seems that there are some very important records and files missing, things of a very delicate nature, things that you, my maidservant, would have access to." He smiled that same old smile that cut like a knife. "Of course, I know that your heart is indeed in union with mine, despite your second thoughts and petty fears of late." She raised her head high and looked right at him. "Those things are strictly the weakness of my humanity, but something over which I expect to gain victory." The weakness of your humanity. He thought that over for a moment. That same little weakness that has always made you so intriguing because it could make you so very dangerous. "You are implying then that I could betray you?" He approached her and rested his hands on her shoulders. Susan imagined how his hands would not have to move far to clamp around her neck. "It is possible," he said, "that someone is trying to betray me. Even now I can read it in the atmosphere." He looked at her very closely, his eyes burrowing into hers. "I might even be reading it in your very own eyes." She turned her eyes away and said, "I would not betray you." He leaned closer and said very coolly, "Nor would anyone else, if they knew what would be in store for them. It would be a very serious business indeed." She felt his hands tighten their grip. A messenger streaked across the sky and then darted, zigzagged, and weaved through the woods above Ashton looking for Tal. "Captain," he called, but Tal was not there among the others. "Where is the captain?" Mata answered, carrying out another prayer gathering at Hank Bush's home. "Be careful not to attract attention." The messenger soared down the hillside and floated quietly into the mazes of streets and alleys below. At Hank's house, Talbot remained carefully hidden within the walls, while some of his warriors carried out his orders, bringing in people ready to pray. Hank and Andy Forsyth had called a special prayer meeting, but they hadn't expected so many people to show up. More and more cars kept arriving. More and more people kept filing through the door. The Colemans, Ron Forsyth and Cynthia, newly saved Barbie Corsi, his parents and Jean, Dan and Jean, the Joneses, the Coopers, the Smiths, the Bartons, some college students and their friends. Hank brought out whatever extra chairs he had. People began to find places on the floor. The room was getting very stuffy. The windows were opened. Tal looked out front and saw an old station wagon pull up. He smiled broadly. This was one arrival Hank would be glad to see. When the doorbell opened, several people hollered, "Come in!" But whoever it was didn't come in. Hank stepped over several people to get to the door and opened it. There stood Lou Stanley, together with his wife Margie. They were holding hands. Lou smiled timidly and asked, "Hi, Hank, is this where you're holding the prayer meeting?" Hank believed it again in miracles. Here was the man who had been removed from the church for adultery, now standing before him, reunited with his wife and wanting to pray with all the others. "Wow," said Hank, "it sure is. Come on in." Lou and Margie entered the packed living room where they were greeted with love and acceptance. Just then there was another knock on the door. Hank was still standing there, so he opened the door and saw an older man and his wife standing outside. He had never seen either one of them before, but Cecil Cooper knew who they were. He called to them from where he was sitting. "Well, praise the Lord, I don't believe it. James and Diane Farrell?" Hank looked at Cecil, and then he looked at the couple standing there, and his mouth dropped open. "Reverend Farrell?" Reverend James Farrell, the former pastor of Ashton Community Church, extended his hand. "Pastor Henry Bush?" Hank nodded, taking his hand. "We got word that there was a prayer meeting here tonight." Hank invited them in with outstretched arms. Meanwhile, the messenger arrived and found Tal. "Captain, Gilio sends word that Susan's time is very short. She is very near discovery. You must come now." Tal took a quick survey of the prayer cover he had gathered. It had to be enough for tonight's plan to work. Hank was starting the meeting. "The Lord has impressed on all of us that we need to pray tonight for Ashton. Now, we've learned some things this afternoon, and we were sure right about Satan having his grip on this town. We need to pray that God will bind the demons that are trying to take over. We need to pray for victory for the people of God and for the angels of God." Good, Tal thought. It might be enough. But what if the messenger said was truly the situation at the strong man's lair? They would have to proceed with the plan, whether the prayer covering was sufficient or not. The demonic cloud over the valley continued to thicken and swirl, and from their vantage point, Gilio and his warriors could see the glimmer of millions of pairs of yellow eyes. Gilio could not relax at all, but continually watched over the mountaintops for the one streak of light that would mark Tal's arrival. "Where is Tal?" he muttered. "Where is he? They know. At this very moment, Cassif's entire staff, the implementing force behind Omni Corporation, was gathered in the dining hall for a makeshift banquet and a final get-together before the big move for which they all had prepared. It was an informal buffet affair. Everything was casual and the mood was light. Cassif himself, usually aloof from his inferiors, mingled freely with them now, and his hands often reached out to him as if imploring a special blessing. Susan remained steadfastly by his side, dressed again in her customary black suit, and hands also reached out to her for a special touch, a special glance or a look of blessing. These she freely bestowed on all the grateful followers. As the meal got underway, Cassif and Susan took their places at the head table. She tried to act normal and enjoy her food, but her master still maintained that smile, that strange, cutting, wicked smile, and it unnerved her. She had to wonder, how much did he really know? Toward the end of dinner, Cassif stood, and as if on signal, everyone in the room immediately became silent. "As we've done in other regions, in other parts of our rapidly uniting world, So we shall do here, Cassip said. The whole room applauded. As a decisive and powerful tool of the Universal Consciousness Society, Omni Corporation is about to establish still another foothold for the coming New World Order and the rule of the New Age Christ. I have received word from our advanced people in Ashton that the purchase of our new facility can be finalized on Sunday, and I will personally go before you to close the deal. After that, the town will be ours. The room broke out into applause and cheers, but then, with a rather abrupt change of mood, Cassip let a scowl come on his face, to which all those present responded with an equal sobriety. Of course, all through this massive effort, we have often been reminded of how serious this business really is in which we are involved, to which we have vowed our lives and our allegiances. We have often pondered how dire the results would be to have everything we work toward if any one of us should ever turn toward the wrong and answer the persistent call of greed temporarily, or even, he looked at Susan, human weakness. Suddenly the room was dead quiet. Everyone's gaze was upon Cassip as his eyes scanned slowly across the whole group. Susan could feel a terror starting to form deep down inside, a terror she had always tried to push down, avoid, control. She could feel the one thing she feared most of all slowly stalking upon her. Cassip continued, only a few of you are aware that in the course of transferring the files from the head office, we discovered that several of our most sensitive folders were missing. Apparently, someone with high privilege and inside access thought those files would be of value some other way. The people began to gasp and murmur, "Oh, don't be alarmed. I have a happy ending to this story. The missing files have been found." Oh, they were all relieved and chuckled amongst themselves. This they seemed to think was another one of Cassip's little teasers. Cassip signaled to some security men toward the back of the room, and one of them picked up, what was it? Susan rose from her chair just a little to see a cardboard box. No, the cardboard box, the one she had hidden behind the linens. He was bringing it toward the front, toward the head table. She remained where she was, but she thought she would faint. Her whole body trembled with fear. The blood drained from her face. Her insides were riddled with horrible pain. She had been discovered. There was no way out. It was a nightmare. The security guard lifted the heavy box onto the table, and Cassip flung it open. Yes, there were all the materials she had so painstakingly sorted out and hidden. He lifted them out and held them up for all to see. The whole crowd gasped in astonishment. Cassip threw the materials back into the box and let the guard carry it away. This box, he announced, was found hidden in the maidservant's linen closet. All were stunned. Some remained frozen with shock. Some shook their heads. Susan Jacobson prayed. She prayed furiously. The messenger arrived back in the valley, and Gilio was voracious for news. "Yes, speak up. He is gathering the prayer cover for the operation tonight. He should be here any moment." Any moment might be too late. Gilio looked toward the buildings below. Any moment, and Susan might be dead. Tal watched while the gathered people prayed intently as the Holy Spirit led them and empowered them. They were praying specifically for the confounding of the demonic host. It just might be enough. He slipped out of the house shrouded by the darkness. He would pass quickly through the town and then fly to the strongman's lair, hopefully in time to save Susan's life. But no sooner had he stepped into the narrow and rutted alley behind the house than he felt a sharp pain in his leg. His sword flashed into view in an instant. In one quick movement, he beheaded a small spirit that had been clinging to him. It dissolved in a puff of blood-red smoke. Another spirit clamped onto his back. He swept it away. Another on his back, another on his leg. Two more slashed, nipping at his head. "It is Tao," he heard them squeak and chatter. "It is Captain Tao." Much more of this noise, and they would bring Rafar. Tao knew he would have to vanquish them all or risk exposure. The demons around his head went quickly enough. He swept up his sword and across his back and dismembered the one clinging there. But they seemed to multiply. Some of them were quite sizable, and all were greedy for the reward Rafar would give for whoever revealed Tao's whereabouts. A large laughing spirit flew in close for a look at Tao and then shot straight into the sky. Tao followed him after an explosion of light and power and grabbed his ankles. The spirit The spirit screamed and began to claw at him. Tao dropped back to earth like a stone, dragging the spirit down with him, the spirit's wings flapping and fluttering like a torn umbrella. Once under the cover of trees and houses, Tao's sword sent the spirit into the abyss, but more demons were coming upon him from all directions. The word was spreading. 2 powerful and muscular guards, the same 2 men who had once been her tuxedoed escorts, dragged and carried Susan between them, hardly letting her use her own feet to carry herself, across the grounds, up onto the porch of the big stone house, and inside, up the ornate staircase, and down the upstairs hall to her room. Casa followed, cool, collected, perfectly ruthless. The guards threw Susan down in a chair and held her there with their full weight, preventing her escape. Casa took a long, icy look at her. "Susan," he said, "my dear Susan, I'm not really shocked at this. Such problems have happened. Such problems have happened before with many others, many times. And every time we've had to deal with it. As you well know, such problems never remain. Never." He moved in close, so close that his words seemed to slap her like little whips. "I never trusted you, Susan. I told you that. So I've kept my eye on you. I've had the others keep their eye on you. And I see now that you have rekindled your friendship with my rival, Mr. Weed." He laughed at that. "I have eyes and ears everywhere, dear Susan. Since the moment your Mr. Weed went to the Ashton Clarion, we have made his business every aspect our business. Wherever he goes, whom he knows, whomever he calls, and whatever he says. And as for the hurried and careless call you made to him today, Susan, did you really think we wouldn't monitor every phone call going out of here? We knew you would make your move sooner or later. All we had to do was wait and be ready. An undertaking such as ours is naturally going to have enemies. We understand that." He leaned over her, his eyes cold and cunning. "But we most certainly will not tolerate it. No, Susan, we deal with it harshly and abruptly. I had thought that one little harassment would silence Weed, but now I find that, thanks to you, he knows far too much. Therefore, it would be best if you and your Mr. Weed are taken care of." All she could do was tremble. She could think of nothing to say. She knew it would be useless to beg for mercy. You've never been to one of our blood rituals, have you?" Casa began to explain it to her, as if giving her a short lecture. The ancient worshippers of Isis or Moloch or Ashtoreth were not too far afield in their practices. They understood at least that the offering of a human life to their so-called gods seemed to bring the gods' favor upon them. What they performed in ignorance, we now continue in enlightenment. The life force that intertwines itself through us and our universe is cyclical, never-ending, self-perpetuating. The birth of the new cannot occur without the death of the old. The birth of good is created by the death of evil. This is karma, dear Susan, your karma. In other words, he was going to kill her. A warrior asked Kilio, "What is that?" What are they doing? They both listened. The cloud, still stirring and swirling slowly about the valley floor, was trickling and babbling now with a strange sound, an indefinable noise that was gradually rose in volume and pitch. At first it sounded like the rush of a faraway wave, and then it grew into the roar of a numberless mob. From this it crescendoed into an eerie wailing of a million sirens. Gilio slowly brought out his sword, and the metal of the blade rang. "What are you doing?" asked the warrior. "Prepare," Gilio ordered, and the order was spread among the group. Ring, ring, ring went their blades as each warrior took his sword in his hand. "They're laughing," said Gilio. "There's nothing we can do but go in." The warrior was willing, and yet the thought was unthinkable. Go in? Go into that? The demons were strong, brutal, savage, and now they were laughing with the smell of approaching death like sweet perfume in their nostrils. Triskel and Cryone came swooping into the valley, swords blazing and sweeping in lethal arcs of light as demons disintegrated on all sides. Other warriors shot into the sky like flares from a cannon, plucking fleeing demons out of the air, silencing them. Tal was in a real bind, wishing he could release his fighting powerful force and yet needing to remain subdued lest he draw attention to himself. Thus he could not vanquish the spirits now clustering on him like angry bees in one violent attack, but rather had to pluck them off one by one, hacking and chopping with his sword. Malta entered the scuffle and came in close to Tal, swinging his sword, plucking demons off, his captain like bats off of a cave wall. There now, and another one. Then came an infinitesimal moment when Tal was clean of demons. Malta quickly slipped into his place while Tal vanished into the ground. The spirits were enraged by the fighting and at first continued to flock and circle about the area. But then they realized that Tal had somehow slipped away, and they were only placing themselves in the hands of a heavenly warrior to be destroyed for no reason. Their numbers quickly dwindled and their cries ebbed away, and soon they were gone. Several miles outside of Ashton, Tal shot out of the ground like a bullet from a rifle, streaking across the sky, a trail of light following him like the tail of a comet. His sword held high out in front of him. Farms, field, forests, highways became a blur beneath him, and the clouds became rushing mountains passing by on either side. He could feel his strength building with the prayers of the saints. His sword began to burn with power, glowing brilliantly. He almost felt it was pulling him through the sky, faster and faster, the wind screaming, the distance shrinking, his wings in invisible roar. He flew for the strong man's lair. A very strange-looking, black-robed and beaded, long-haired little guru from some dark and pagan land stepped into Susan's room at Cassav's bidding. He bowed in obeisance to his lord and master Cassav. "Prepare the altar," said Cassav. "There will be a special offering for the success of our endeavor." The little pagan priest left quickly. Cassav returned his attention to Susan. He took one look at her and then gave her the back of his hand. "Pow! Stop that," he shouted. "Stop that praying." The force of the blow nearly knocked her out of the chair, but one guard held her firmly. Her head sank and she began to sob in very short, shallow gasps of terror. Cassav, like a conqueror, stood above her and boasted over her limp and trembling form. "You have no God to call upon. With the nearness of your death, you crumble. You fall back upon old myths and religious nonsense." Then he said almost kindly, "What you don't realize is that I'm actually doing you a favor. Perhaps in your next life, your understanding will be deeper and your frailties will have fallen away. Your sacrificial gift to us now will build wonderful karma for you in the lives to come. You'll see." Then he spoke to the guards. "Bind her." They grabbed her wrists and held them behind her. She heard a click and felt the cold steel of the manacles. She heard herself screaming. Cassav went to his office, now a bare room except for a few remaining shipping crates and travel cases. He went directly to a small case covered with fine old leather and tucked it under his arm. Then he went down the big staircase to the lower floor, through an imposing plank door, and down another stairway into a deep basement below the house. He turned one corner, passed through another door, and entered a dark candlelit room of stone. The strange little priest was already there, lighting candles and moaning some strange, unintelligible words over and over. Some of Cassav's closest confidants were present, waiting quietly. Cassav handed the little case to the priest, who laid it beside a large, rough-hewn bench at one end of the room. The little priest opened the case and began to set out knives, Cassav's knives, ornate, jeweled, delicately wrought, razor sharp. Tal could see the mountains ahead. He would have to stay close to their rocky sides. He must not be seen. Giulio and his warriors remained in the darkness, unglorified, stalking step by step downward toward the complex, concealing themselves behind the rocks and old snags. Just above them now, boiling and towering like a thunderhead, the cloud of leering, laughing spirits continued to swirl. Giulio was sensing some prayer cover. Surely the demons would have noticed them by now. But their eyes were strangely unseen. Down below, parked very near the main administration building, was a large van. Giulio found a spot from which he could see the van clearly, then had his warriors fan out, keeping one warrior close by for special instruction. "Do you see the upper window in the big stone house?" Giulio asked him. "Yes, she is there. On my signal, go alone and get her out." All right. You all, I'm going to do a bonus chapter, but for those of you that have to drop off, please do and catch up as you can. But I'm going to read chapter 29 as well. We started a little late, and hopefully, I think in another 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be finished. This is our final chapter for tonight, chapter 29. Reading for you this present darkness. In the strange dark room below the house, Alexander Cassav and his little entourage remained transfixed in deep meditation. Before them, just behind the rough wooden bench, stood the strong man, flanked by his close guards and assistants. His sagging face was spread now with a hideous, drooling grin that bared his fangs as he chuckled with demonic delight. "One by one, the obstacles are falling," he said. Yes, your offering will bring you good fortune, and it will please me." The big yellow eyes narrowed with the command, "Bring her." Upstairs, sitting helplessly between the two guards, her feet and hands bound with manacles, Susan Jacobson waited and prayed. With all that was within her, she cried out to the one true God, the God whom she did not know but must be there, had to hear her, and was the only one who could help her now. Tal reached the mountains and soared up, their steep face climbing, easing back his speed. He continued to slow as he neared the top, and then, just as he crested the summit, he stopped, all motion and all sound, and he let himself glide down the other side silently, invisibly. He noticed with concern that the cloud had grown even more since he'd been away. He could only hope the prayer cover would be at least sufficient to blind these foul creatures. Giulio had been watching for the captain, and his sharp eyes saw Tal descending like a silent hawk toward them. "Get ready," Giulio told the warriors at his side. The warrior was poised, his eyes on that upstairs window. Tal dropped down so low he almost skidded to the ground. He finally came to a rest right beside Giulio. "We have the cover." "Go," Giulio commanded the warrior, and the warrior half flew, half ran toward the big stone house. The little priest, his eyes darting about with anticipation, made his way up the big staircase, humming and muttering to himself a mantra to himself. Cassav and his people waited downstairs in a hushed silence, Cassav standing right next to the knives. Susan Jacobson tried to work the shackles loose, but they were clamped tightly enough to cut into her even if she didn't struggle. The guards only laughed at her. "Dear God," she prayed, "if you are truly the ruler of this universe, please have mercy on one who dared to stand for your sake against a terrible evil." And then, as if she were no longer in that room, as if she were slowly waking up from a nightmare, the agonizing, Heart-twisting fear began to ebb from her mind like a fading thought, like the slow, steady calming of a storm. Her heart was at rest. The room seemed strangely quiet. All she could do was look around with very curious eyes. What had happened? Had she died already? Was she asleep or dreaming? But she had felt this way before. The memory of that one night in New York came back to her. She thought of that strange, buoyed up feeling she had, even as she clambered desperately through that window. There was someone in that room. She could sense it. "Are you here to help me?" she asked in her heart, and the faintest little spark of hope came to life again somewhere deep inside her. Clink! Her feet were suddenly released and could swing unbound from the chair. The shackles lay on the floor, opened. She felt something break loose from around her wrist, and she pulled her arms free. The manacles clinked to the floor just like the shackles that had bound her feet. She looked at the two guards, but they were just standing there, looking at her, still smirking, and then looking elsewhere as if nothing had happened. Then she heard a click and looked just in time to see the window latch twist loose and the big bedroom window swing open all by itself. The cool night air began to waft into the room. Whether this was an illusion or reality, she accepted it. She jumped up from the chair. The guards did nothing. She ran for that open window. Then she remembered. Still keeping a wary and unbelieving eye on those guards, she hurried to the bed. She reached under it and pulled out a suitcase that Cassup and his people had not found, even in such an obvious hiding place. It felt strangely light for all the papers she had loaded in it, but nothing at this moment made much sense anyway, so she simply accepted how easy it was to carry the suitcase to the window and set it on the rooftop outside. She looked behind her. The guards were smiling confidently at an empty chair. Feeling as if someone was lifting her, she climbed through the window and onto the roof. A thick vine grew up on one side of the house. It would make a perfect escape ladder. Outside the administration building, some security people were talking in hushed tones about the fall of the maidservant and her imminent fate when suddenly they heard footsteps running across the parking lot. "Hey, look there," someone shouted. The security men looked just in time to see a woman dressed in black scurrying for one of the trucks. "Hey, what are you doing?" "It's the maidservant." They ran after her, but she had already reached a big moving van and climbed inside. The starter growled and the engine came to life, and with a lurch and a whine, the van started rolling away. Giulio leaped from his hiding place and bellowed, "Yaha!" And his little troop of 3 and 20 popped into the air like fireworks and trailed after the van. "Cover yourselves, warriors." The little priest reached Susan's bedroom, and his bony hand opened the door. "We are ready," he declared, and suddenly realized that he was talking to a pair of very dedicated guards, making very sure an empty chair would not get away. The little pagan had a first-class fit. The guards had no explanation. The van sluggishly headed up the winding and precarious road that led out of the valley and over the mountains. 4 angels swooped down behind it and started pushing it up the grade, helping it to top 60. They were making good time, but looking back, they can see an oncoming legion of demons in hot pursuit, the glimmer of their fangs and the red flicker of their blades filling the night sky. From high above, Giulio watched the cloud. It remained where it was, covering the strong man. Only a small contingent of demonic warriors had been sent after the runaway van. Roaring up the mountain road in pursuit, 4 of Cassup's armed security men gave chase in a high-powered jeep. Even so, they had a surprising amount of trouble catching up. "I thought that thing had a full load," said one. "It does," said the other. "I loaded it myself." "How many horses does that thing have?" By now, Cassup had gotten word of Susan's escape. He ordered 8 more men and 2 more vehicles to join the chase. They leaped into another Jeep and a V8-powered sports car and squealed out of the parking lot. Demons and angels converged on the van, still chugging up the steep grade at more than 60 miles an hour, its tires growling and often skidding sideways across the winding, reeling gravel road. The 4 angels kept pushing it from behind while the other 19 did their best to encircle it and ward off demonic attack. Demons dove down from above, their red swords gleaming, and engaged the heavenly warriors in fierce dogfights, the blades singing, droning, and clashing metallically with bursts of sparks. The van came to the summit and picked up more speed. The pursuing vehicles topped the summit only seconds behind it. As the van accelerated more and more, the bumps and curves in the road became one death-dealing jolt or one frame-bending wrench after another. And the van rocked, dancing on 2 and 3 wheels as it careened down the steep grade. The road went straight, and then it turned abruptly, then it twisted back the other direction, then it took a dip. The van wrestled on the road as the rocks and the guardrails blurred by. With each sharp curve, it groaned and leaned heavily toward the outside, the big frame bottoming out the springs and the tires screeching in protest. A very sharp left turn, the van's heavy back end fishtailed into the guardrail with a loud, grinding, fiery shower of sparks. Down the road, another dip, the springs bottoming out, the frame crunching down on the axles, groaning and creaking. The Jeeps and the sports car followed behind, doing much better at negotiating the treacherous curves, but getting the ride of their lives all the same time. 2 men in the lead Jeep had high-powered rifles ready, but it was impossible to get any clear shot. They fired a few rounds anyway, if only to scare the maidservant. The van was headed right for a hairpin turn, with yellow signs everywhere screaming at it to slow down and be cautious. The 4 angels who had been behind the van pushing were now pressed up against its sides, trying to keep it on the road. Gileo himself swooped down, his sword flashing, hacking his way through demon interceptors until he could work his way to the van. It was only a fraction of a second from the guardrail and the sheer drop beyond it when Gileo slammed forcefully into its side, jolting the front wheels to the left with a sharp jerk. The van made the turn and rolled on. The pursuers in the other vehicles had to slow down or go right through the guardrail. But the heavenly warriors trying to encircle the van were being steadily cut away. Gileo looked just in time to see one huge spirit pounce with bared talons on top of a warrior like a hawk on a sparrow, knocking the angel senseless, making it flutter down into the deep canyon below. Another dogfight high above and to the left ended in a cry of pain from another warrior who went into a crazy spin. One wing shredded and disappeared inside the wall of a mountain. The ringing clashes of blades echoed all around. There went a demon disappearing in a trail of red smoke. Another angel fell toward the canyon floor, still holding his sword, but listless and stunned, his demon pursuer right behind him. The hideous warriors of hell finally began to break through and reach the van. One reached the warrior right behind Gileo and knocked him away. Gileo didn't have time to think another thought before his own sword went up to fend off the incredibly powerful blow of a spirit at least equal to himself. Gileo returned the blow, their swords locked for a moment, arm against arm, and then Gileo made good use of his foot to cave in the demon's face and sent it tumbling over the canyon. The van began to swerve wildly, the tires tiptoeing on the very edge of the chasm. Gileo pushed with all his might to get it back on course. The van lurched again, and he realized a band of demons must be on the other side pushing against him. He looked around for help and saw more fangs and yellow eyes than friends. A huge blade swept downward over his shoulder, and he parried it off. Another one thrust toward his midsection, and he struck that one away. The van veered toward the cliff. He tried to push back, parry a blow, look for help, strike another demon, kick a face, push the van, cut a flank, parry a blow, guide the van, a blow he didn't see coming and had no idea who had struck it, but it stunned him. He lost his grip on the van, saw the canyon floor spinning far below, saw the earth, the sky, the earth, the sky. He was falling. He spread his wings and floated downward like a torn and fallen leaf. From up above, he heard a blood-curdling howl. He looked up. This must be the one who had struck him, a very large, bulb-eyed nightmare with reptilian skin and serrated wings. Come, come, Gileo muttered. Come, Gileo muttered, waiting for the thing to pounce. It dove straight at him, its jaws gaping, its fangs glimmering, a wide, flat blade with keen edge flashing. Gileo waited. The thing raised its sword high and brought it down with a whoosh. Gileo was suddenly 3 feet away from where he had been, and the blade continued on its way without their having met. the demon somersaulting wildly after it. Gilio made a blinding sweep with his own sword and de-winged the demon, then finished. The boiling trail of red smoke cleared away from Gilio's eyes just in time for him to see the van crash through a guardrail and sail out over the precipice. The fall was so very long and extended that the van seemed to float for an eternity before folding and crushing on the rocks below, twisting, turning, bouncing like a pop can as chairs, desks, cabinets tumbled out of the back and papers upon papers fluttered through the air like snowflakes. About 30 demons hovered high above or roosted on the remaining guardrail to watch their work come to completion. After turning and rolling over and over, the van, no longer recognizable as anything, finally came to a rest in a heap of scrap and glass at the base of the mountain. The 3 pursuing vehicles pulled to a stop, and the 20 security men got out to take a satisfied look. Gilio rested on a rocky crag, setting his sword down and looking skyward. High above, he could make out minute streaks of light heading in several different directions, each one followed by 2 or 3 streaks of red accented black. His warriors, what was left of them, were scattering in all directions. Gilio thought it best to remain where he was until the skies cleared. He, Tal, and their warriors would all regroup in Ashton soon enough. Rafar still sat in the big dead tree watching over the town of Ashton, as a master at chess would sit and look over a game board. He enjoyed watching the many pieces and pawns make their moves against each other. When a demon messenger brought the welcome news from the strongman's lair that the maidservant, that treacherous wench, had come to a miserable end and the heavenly host had been routed, Rafar gloated and laughed. He had taken his opponent's queen, and so shall it be for the rest. Rafar said with a diabolical glee. The strong man entrusted the preparation of the town to me. When he comes, he will find it unoccupied, swept, and put in order. He called some of his warriors. It's time to clean house. While the heavenly hosts are weak and cannot stand against us, we should take care of the final obstacles. I would like Hogan and Bush put away like vanquished kings. Make use of the woman Carmen and see to it that they are bound and helpless, a byword and a mockery. As for Kevin Weed, the demon warlord's eyes narrowed with disdain. He could never be a worthy prize for such as myself. See that he is killed any way you wish, and then bring me word. The warriors departed to carry out his orders. Rafar heaved a deep, half-mocking sigh. Ah, dear captain of the host, perhaps I will see my battle won with no more than a raised finger, a casual order, the poison of my subtlety. Your sky-rending trump of a battle will be displaced by a pitiful whimper, and my victory will be won without my ever having seen your face or your sword. He looked over the town and broke into his fiendish grin, clicking his thumb talon across his other forearm. But do be sure of this, we shall meet, Tal. Do not think to hide behind your praying saints, for we can both see they have failed you. You and I shall meet. Bernice knew it would be difficult, even dangerous, to drive without her glasses, but Marshall never answered his phone, so the meeting with Kevin Weed was entirely up to her, and certainly worth the risk. So far, as she drove up Highway 27, the daylight was sufficient to make out the center line and the oncoming blobs, so she pressed on toward the big green bridge of North Baker. Kevin Weed also had that bridge in mind as he sat at the bar at the Evergreen Tavern, with his hands around a beer and his eyes on the big Lucky Lager clock. Somehow he felt safer here than at home by himself. He had buddies around, lots of noise, the ball game on television, the shuffleboard going on behind him. His hand still shook, though, every time he let go of his beer mug, so most of the time he hung on to it and tried to act normal. The front door kept scraping the linoleum as more people came in. The place was warming up, which was just fine, the more the merrier. Several loggers had beers to buy and stories to tell. There were bets going on all around the shuffleboard game. Tonight, a long-standing rivalry would be settled once and for all. Kevin took time to smile and greet his friends and exchange a little jaw time that helped him loosen up. 2 loggers came in. They were new, he figured. He'd never seen them before. But they fit right in with the rest of the bunch and were quick to get everyone caught up on where they were working and for how long and how the weather had been good, bad, or indifferent. They even came up and sat with him at the bar. "Hey," said one, extending his hand. "Mark Hansen." "Kevin Weed," he said, shaking Mark's hand. Mark introduced Kevin to the other guy, Steve Drake. They hit it off fine, talking logging, baseball, deer hunts, booze. And Kevin's hand quit shaking. He even finished his beer. "Want another beer?" Mark asked. "Yeah, sure." Dan bought the beers and the conversation kept rattling on. A loud cheer went up from the shuffleboard championship for all time, and the 3 of them spun around in their seats to see the winner shaking hands with the loser. Mark was quick. When no one was looking, he emptied a small vial into Kevin's beer. The shuffleboard crowd began to congregate at the bar, and Kevin checked the clock. It was time to go anyway. In all the hubbub and chatter, he managed to say so long to his new acquaintances, down his beer, and head for the door. Mark and Steve gave him a friendly wave as he went. Kevin climbed into his old pickup and drove off. He figured he would even get to the bridge a little early. Just thinking about it made him starting to shake again. Mark and Steve wasted no time. Kevin had no sooner pulled out onto the highway than they were in their own pickup truck, following some distance behind. Steve checked his watch. "It won't be long now," he said. "So where do we dump him?" asked Mark. "What's wrong with the river? He's heading there anyway." It must have been that last beer, Kevin was thinking to himself. He must have chugged it down too fast or something. His stomach was letting him know about it. On top of that, he had to go to the bathroom. He was getting really sleepy. He spent a few minutes debating what to do, but finally he figured he better pull over before he just plain keeled over. A garishly painted, sagging, low overhead hamburger joint was just ahead. He pulled off the highway and managed to bring the truck to a safe stop beside the building. He didn't notice the pickup truck that pulled off the highway and then waited some 100 of yards behind him. "Terrific," said Mark angrily. "So what's he going to do, keel over right in front of that hamburger place? I thought that stuff was supposed to hit hard and fast." Steve only shook his head. "Maybe he just has to go to the bathroom. We'll have to wait and see." It looked like Steve was right. Kevin stumbled and staggered his way into the men's restroom behind the building. For a minute or so, they stared at the restroom door. Steve looked at his watch again. Time was getting short. If he comes out and gets back on the road, the stuff should hit him before he reaches the bridge. If he even comes out, Mark muttered. What if we have to drag him out of there? No, here he came, out the restroom, looking a little better. As the 2 men watched, Kevin climbed back into his truck, pulled back out onto the highway, and they followed him, waiting for something to happen. It did. The truck began to swerve first to the left, then back to the right. "There he goes," said Steve. Up ahead was the Judd River Bridge, a steel span over a very deep chasm carved out by the Judd River. The little truck kept speeding along crazily, veering clear over to the left lane and then back into the right lane and then over onto the shoulder. "He's fighting it, trying to stay awake," Steve observed. "It probably was watered down with too much beer." The truck went over onto the shoulder and the tires began to wobble and dig into the soft gravel. The rear wheels spun and threw rocks and the truck fishtailed along for several feet, heading for the bridge. But by now the driver had no control and seemed to have slipped into sleep with his foot on the gas pedal. The truck roared and accelerated and then shot across the road, roared across the wide turnoff just before the bridge, leaped upon a clump of alder saplings, and finally soared off the rocky precipice into the river canyon below. Mark and Steve pulled to a stop on the bridge just in time to look over the side and see the truck sinking, wheels up into the river. "Score one more for Castle," said Steve. Another driver in an oncoming car screeched to a halt and jumped out of his auto. Soon another vehicle pulled up. The bridge was starting to get clogged with excited people. Mark and Steve eased away, marking their way off the bridge. "We'll call the fire department," Mark shouted out his window. And away they went, never to be seen or heard from again. All right, good people, that's it for today, plus your bonus chapter. We'll pick it up next week, Monday at 5 o'clock. with our week 8 of This Present Darkness. We'll be on chapter 30. I'd like to thank you all for hanging in there with me tonight and for the difficulty we had in this session. I'll figure out by next week what we're doing. But anyway, I thank you all so much. Just a quick prayer. Lord, we thank you for all of those that listened in on tonight. God, for everything that's going on in our lives. We thank you for the peace and comfort that you bring. We thank you, God, just for blessing us and our families. We're praying for those families, God, that's still dealing with death, loss, those that's dealing with social isolation. Father, we ask that you be, God, comfort and bring again peace and even joy in this time. We thank you for resources and provisions. We ask that you increase our level of discernment during these times, God. Ask that you help us remember to pray and intercede and to seek you in all things. And Father, we will give your name all glory and honor. All right, it's been a pleasure. Thank you all. Good night.